Well, welcome everyone to today's panel discussion, the Provincial Election Unpacked, Countdown to the Vote. So I'm Margot, Director of Issues in Government Relations at the Greater Saskatoon Chamber of Commerce and PAC board member. So I'll be guiding us through today's conversation as we discuss some key trends, the candidates' platforms, and potential impact of this election on our province. So we have a great lineup of guests with us today. I'm excited to dive into some important topics. So I'll introduce our guests. We have Sam Yaholninsky of Momentum Strategies and fellow PAC board member, Provincial Affairs reporter with CBC, Adam Hunter, and Nathaniel Cole, strategic advisor from the Saskatchewan Federation of Labor. So thank you all for being here today. Really appreciate you guys taking the time. So we have a very informal discussion. We want to jump into it. So let's get going here. So first logistical question. While the election is unofficially underway, there is still some uncertainty when it will be formally called. So when do you anticipate this campaign to officially begin? And do you think the timing will impact voter interest or party momentum?
Super good question. I'll jump in. I think it's either going to be September 29th or October 1st. September 30th is National Truth and Reconciliation Day. So that is definitely off limits. I know there's lots of campaign office opening parties on the 29th. And so those would be my best guesses. I don't think it's a terrible mystery, but
on my calendar, I have written in. It was pencil for a while, but it's pen now. For me, I think I'd say 90% chance October 1st. Seems to make the most sense, and that would be, I think, kind of the minimum length campaign period or writ period for this election.
And I'll say the first for the reasons Sam and Nathaniel have already gone over. Another additional reason is the government has the power to call the election, of course, and a shorter campaign is beneficial to them. They can spend this next week with announcements that are government announcements, but are party announcements. They can get to as many places as they want. It'll save their campaign some money, and a shorter campaign is typically beneficial because you're not going to be in a situation where you have more to lose as the governing party with a longer campaign. So shorter campaign makes sense. 27 days is the minimum. That would be October 1st. So I think, and just another logistical thing is the lieutenant governor is who the premier goes to. And I would anticipate the lieutenant governor, even if they wanted to call it on the 30th, which I don't anticipate anyone wants to do that, Russ Marassi will be tied up that day. So I think he'll be at a lot of events. So that's another reason why I think the first makes a lot of sense.
Okay, so I think we have some consensus there. Good little insight. So this pre-campaign period has been rife with speculation and soft campaigning. Once the election is officially called, we're assuming that the landscape will shift, but it's kind of unclear how. So what do you guys think will change the campaign once the campaign officially begins? And do you expect a different tone or strategy from the parties once the election is formally underway?
Sure. Maybe I could take a stab at that. I guess nerding out on some of the, I think from an election financing perspective is the primary incentive for how some things may look different before versus after the election is called, which you don't see in like American politics. Once the writ is called here, there's spending limits for both parties and for local campaigns. But of course, one thing that people may not know is that most of those expenses are rebatable. So, on September, say we're called on October 1st, a radio ad on September 30th is going to cost you full price. But realistically, for any campaigns that get over a pretty small threshold, I think provincially it's 10%. All of your election expenses, I think you're going to get 60 cents on the dollar back on any of those. So it sort of incentivizes to sort of, in this kind of, it's sort of the calm before the storm, save some of those expenses, announcements, the war game, your campaign staff, saving them until the election is called.
I would definitely say that we've seen it being pretty quiet, so that makes a lot of sense. Any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would just say that the last 2.5 weeks, the NDP has had an announcement a day, and so they're strategically trying to meet the government where it's not a quote unquote Saskatchewan party announcement, but it's a government announcement. Almost every day, we get 5 news releases from the government where they're available at different locations around the province. It could be a school opening, groundbreaking. There, you know, today there was a announcement about the Health and Human Resources Plan where we had 3 ministers there. Carla Beck was doing an announcement at the exact same time about healthcare. And so we are getting that where they're both trying to grab the attention of the voter before the election. And I've talked to a lot of people who are like, oh, I thought the campaign was already on. I'm seeing these people on the news every night. And I think that is an advantage for both the governing Saskatchewan Party and the NDP is that they're out well ahead of this. That may turn into some fatigue with people that are, you know, kind of tired of hearing the same messaging over and again. But there is some jockeying for eyeballs already. And I think that what I would expect in the start of the campaign is a couple of things. Within the few days, we'll probably get some platform announcements, maybe more numbers on what things are going to cost, what they're going to spend on certain big platform policies. The other thing is both campaigns, I would anticipate, this has been my experience in the past, is they'll try and submarine a few candidates with some history, some old social media posts, criminal records, things of that nature. We've already seen the SAS party kind of get ahead of that with some impaired driving convictions. The NDP has been asked about that. Other parties have been asked about that. So they're trying to get ahead of that bad news that comes out. And that typically will happen right at the start of the campaign, the first week or two. So that's what I would anticipate at the start. And then people will obviously pay attention to it because they'll know there's an election campaign going on. The advertising increases. People hit the pavement. They'll get people at their door. And so that just generally will get people more into the campaign.
For sure.
I think the only very great assessment from both of you gentlemen. I was going to talk about the torpedoing. I was in 2 war rooms in 2011 and 2016. And I think on the first day we torpedoed, I think it was 3 NDP candidates.
Sam, that was my first election in a war room, and I was also a candidate on the ballot for a far-flung rural constituency, sort of ducking and covering.
Yes. And so the only other piece I would add is that it's also sort of the first time that it's not just the party and their caucus and their cabinet. They've got candidates out there. And even if they're not torpedoed, there's lots of opportunity now for them to step in the wrong pile of, you know what, to say the wrong thing and to create issues there. I think both parties work pretty hard to keep a tight wrap on their messaging and what's out there. And so I'll be watching just to see who may derail the campaign for either side. And that should be always interesting too.
You know, to build on kind of what I'm hearing here, I wanted to talk a little bit about so far, I guess, what some of the main focus of the campaigning has been so far, as well as if we're seeing both the SAS party and the NDP offering concrete visions of the future, or if we're still stuck in the defending or critiquing our past record a little bit here, because I think that is a bit of a theme we see a lot, and I hear you guys saying that right now as well. So do you think we're looking forward, or are we in the looking past phase right now?
I'll jump in. I think probably we could talk about this for the whole cast, aside from any other question. I think right now it's definitely you get a pony and you get a pony from both sides, probably more so the NDP. But neither side, I don't think, has done a very good job of taking a forward-looking view of what Saskatchewan can look like as we're moving forward. The NDP, they're at least moving into some of their non-traditional realms of discussion and policy, like the economy, like, jobs and things like that. So I give them a lot of credit on that front. I think they've improved in a number of ways that they're approaching this campaign. I think that probably has something to do with sort of their campaign management and leadership team. But it's the same for the SAS party. They're really, and I hate to say it, but I think they're stuck in the past too. They've had, I think, almost 17 years of governing. What's the rest of, if you guys are going to be leaders again for the next 15 years, what does that actually look like? I think that, they've done a great job and there's always room for improvement and they've made some mistakes for sure, but neither side has really painted a strong picture. And I think, I don't know, I haven't seen a lot of polling to get into that sort of deep level interest of people, but if I'm thinking it, and I'm a freak, right? I'm the 5% of the world that actually thinks about this more than once a day. I gotta believe that other people are thinking it too. So, and my only other thought on it is just across the country, there's a desire for change. Polls have shown it, and I'm curious. I don't know that that's showing up as strongly in the polls as we've thought, but polling can't be trusted in a lot of cases, especially in horse race polling. So I'm very, very keen to see how this turns out in the cities because it could spell a massive change for the Sask party if it doesn't go positively.
Yeah, I would just add, I think there is sort of a battle for eyeballs. There's a battle for, trying to pick out that one issue or two issues that these parties think the voters are really going to latch onto. Sometimes it's easier in like a by-election or a civic election when there's maybe one or two issues that people can really say, okay, this is what I'm voting on. This is why I'm motivated to vote, or this is why I'll listen to you at the doorstep. I don't know if there's that yet, and that it could come during the campaign where there's that one issue that everyone's unified on, or a couple people are going to run to the polls for. As Sam said, people in the cities are going to maybe change their vote from the Sask party to the NDP, or just not vote at all, or go to the Saskatchewan United Party or someone else, right? I think that remains to be seen. There's obviously I think there's three main election stories. One is the cost of living, affordability, what these parties are offering people, no matter where they stand on the political spectrum, whether they're rural, they're in their cities. People have the same sort of issues in that sense. The second would be education. It's going to be a big one. We saw this in different ways play out during the by-election. We saw it also with, a lot of the announcements the government's making right now is schools they're building, what they've spent on education. The NDP and we see the STF come out with some campaigns on what they think the government's not doing. And then finally, healthcare. I mentioned that was, at an announcement already today. Both sides are kind of jockeying for that because that's something that, regardless of where you are and who you vote for, whether you vote, everyone's affected by this, and everyone has a story about, a loved one or someone that they know, or maybe they're related to a nurse, or they can't get a family physician, something like that. Or those are going to be something that I think the party is going to have to sell to the public. Hey, the vision we have is clear. This is like one or two lines we can sell you to that on this, and that's going to be the real battle because people's attention spans are so short, and I think I give a lot of credit to the voters, but at the same time, people don't know, in my experience, what level of government is responsible for what policy, what part of your taxes. So it's, especially with municipal elections happening right now, and we have what's happening in Ottawa in the background. There's so much air out there that these parties are going to have to clear through to get through to people, and that'll be one of those I think key parts of the campaign. Is there going to be a breakthrough? Is there going to be a big splash? And I think is part of Sam's earlier point was we haven't really seen that yet, and maybe that's to come. I'm going to be interested to see what they have up their sleeve in this way.
Yeah, I guess I think the question was sort of about like forward versus backward thinking. Maybe not a bad time at this point to disclose, I maybe have a horse in the race in this election, right? I've worked in various roles in the NDP and progressive politics, so I'm not going to be able to take that hat off. I think the Sask party is more focused on the past. I think that's what's worked for them since 1997. The NDP boogeyman has been what's kept that coalition together, and it's what kept people voting for them. I think that the NDP boogeyman isn't as relevant now. For one, it's been 17 years, and at some point you've got to start running on your own record. And secondly, I think perhaps through the pandemic, through this last term of the Sask party, I think sort of the unifying force, which was never let the NDP form government again, which is what kind of kept that coalition together. We're starting to see some cracks in. And I think that's because there's been a bit of ideology creep in, perhaps influenced by American elections, perhaps influenced by, some anxiety and the way we were pulled throughout the pandemic. But you can start to see some cracks in the Sask party in the last 2 years that I never have seen in my adult life. And they've been in government. I turned 18 and like 3 months later, they were elected government. So I think I'm not going to say Carla Beck's future focused nor past focused. I think what I see from the NDP and Carla Beck is sort of just focused on the here and now and trying to, resonate with what people's issues are right now, and not, what they look like 17 years ago or, what they're going to look like 17 years from now, but kind of just like responding to issues that people are having. And I think we see everywhere, and I think data shows that the two top issues leading into this election, which they've been for months, if not years now, are healthcare and the cost of living. So I think that's where we're going to see people, as far as issues are concerned, focus on. But I don't think issues are the ballot box question this election. I think the ballot box question, in particular for the NDP, they want to frame it as, can you trust us enough to give us a shot? Are you ready for change? I think in previous elections, there's not been enough confidence that the NDP was ready to form government. And I think as they look more to form government and the Sask party kind of gets a little more old and tired, I don't think anyone disagrees that 17-year-old government is starting to gray around the temples a bit. That sort of the message for change becomes more and more something that, as an opposition party looking to form government, you want to try and frame as your question to voters.
Well, that's interesting. And Margot, you're probably going to get to this, so I'll just say, traditionally, a lot of campaigns have been leaders, right, head to head. And in this election in particular,
Right.
I'm not sure that that's the case. The Sask party has changed their branding and kind of slogans a couple of times. And to be honest, I can't actually think about what the NDP's is off the top of my head. I can see their colors. Well, I think that in itself is also a really interesting conversation. I don't think the party's message domination has been as good as it's been in past years.
Yeah, I think, and to that point, I think, neither party would probably suggest that they have a firebrand orator of a generation as a leader, that really like compels with a message, many Saskatchewan politicians. I give Brad Wall lots of credit for being a great communicator and a great message, as well as some former NDP and CCF premiers that are known across the country. And I don't think that that's something that either party would say that they have right now. And so I think that sort of shifts the dynamics around the leaders as well.
I think to build off what I'm hearing a little bit as well, I want to know how we would evaluate some of the announcements that have been made so far and what is resonating well. So we did hear, Adam talked about some of the three key pillars that we know are big in this election and have been big for many, many years. But what can we see coming up that really will resonate with voters? And have we seen anything so far that you think people are really grabbing onto?
Who wants to go first? Go, Sam.
Well, I don't have any horses in this race anymore. Did I help a few nomination candidates? Yes, but I'm not actively involved provincially at all. One of the things that I've sort of been looking at and hearing about is just general fatigue among party supporters with where the party is at. I've heard a lot of challenge around actually getting voter or volunteers out, and some of those things. So for me, I'm just kind of wondering, what does that actually look like for the future of the Sask party? And in particular, I'm concerned about this election turnout, and whether it spells, we didn't do so bad, so we can keep on going, or, oh God, this was really bad and we need to make some significant changes and take a good hard look at ourselves in the mirror. But I can't remember exactly what your question was, Margot, and I feel like I'm talking around it and not at it.
No, that's okay. I want to know kind of what's resonating. And if things are resonating, we talked a little bit about the leaders themselves. Are they resonating? Like, what is hitting with voters right now? Or is it what we're kind of suggesting? We're hearing a lot of chatter, but no one's paying a lot of attention. which I hate to say out loud, but I think might be a little
It,
bit of the case.
yeah, I just think, I am, full disclosure, working on a mayoral campaign in Saskatoon. And I can't even get the media to cover anything that we've put out unless they're talking to all four candidates, and in which case they're just printing a statement. And so, I think there's part of it is the state of media. And I'm sure Adam can speak to this. There's not a ton of depth or ability or resources anymore to cover a lot of it. But for me, I just feel I don't think anybody knows where the points are to hit at this point. I think we've talked about it, and there's rhetoric and there's messaging and there's language, but I just don't think somehow it's gotten there. And I think a lot about sort of generally the distrust that younger people in particular, me and Nathaniel's generation, maybe Adam fits in there. Margot, you probably fit in there. I don't know how old or young everybody is, but there's a certain age demographic where distrust in politicians and government is massive and growing. And that distrust, I think, translates into disinterest, disengagement, and cynicism. And so what I'm really looking for, and to be honest, what I've really enjoyed about this mayoral campaign is actually trying to talk about something real, not use talking points, not dance around something, but actually like, look, there are real problems in this city or in this province, and we're going to do something about it. And the one thing I'll give the Sask Party credit for, and it hasn't been enough in terms of all social services and healthcare, but working on help for people who have addictions. They've, sort of been pushing into that. And I think that sort of heart and social well-being piece is been missing. And so that's kind of where my head's at on the whole disengagement, or not sure where people stand or what it's going to take to resonate with people.
I think the difficult thing for the government and the Sask Party at this point in their, we're talking about the 17-year thing, is if we're talking about, affordability concerns or healthcare concerns, they've been the government. And so to try and tell people, hey, you may be concerned about how much things cost, or that you're having trouble finding a place to rent or finding a job, but actually things are much better than you maybe have been told by the NDP or what you're seeing in the media, that sort of thing. You can trust us to keep this going. And the tricky balance is, we're growing, and to talk about this vision for the future, what we're going to do as far as the population and growing industry and bringing in businesses to set up shop in rural Saskatchewan or in urban Saskatchewan, versus not raising taxes or keeping taxes how they are. Because one thing that we haven't mentioned that's come up quite a bit now, and I've talked to some of the other minor parties in this on this, and they're all kind of united on a different tax cut promise. And so far, we don't have anything from the Saskatchewan Party on that. We may get something, but they've been asked about it repeatedly. And Scott Moe's been asked about it repeatedly leading up to this, because Carla Beck's going to hold the line on taxes, cut the gas tax, and take some of the PST sweet things out. That's also the position of, the PC Party, for example. The Saskatchewan United Party and the Buffalo Party have their own tax cut things that they're going to be going to the doorstep on. And whether you think they have any shot of getting votes or getting a seat or being in a race, that's going to be something that they're going to be constantly telling people if they have a town hall, if they have a meeting, to say, hey, we're going to do something about taxes. And if the government doesn't have something to go back to other than, hey, things are going really well, trust us, but they need the tax base, they need the money in the revenue. We've seen that in the budget over the last number of years. So I think when it comes down to the affordability question and looking into the future, they're going to consistently be asked about the tax. We're already seeing, cut the tax ads from these other parties. And that's something that they're going to be consistently asked about in the campaign. And I'm really curious to see what they're going to come up with as far as the response to that. Because right now their line has been, well, we can't afford to cut the PST right now. We need that revenue. I don't know if that's going to work. We'll see. And it's going to be about, as you guys have all alluded to, getting that attention from the voters. We also have an American election campaign that takes up so much attention, political attention from people. Like even myself, I cover this full time. I only have so much bandwidth to pay attention to what's happening there, follow the provincial politics, which is my job, also pay attention to municipal politics. I'm also a voter. I'm a taxpayer. I'm trying to pay attention to what's happening in Ottawa as it relates to what's happening here, there's just a lot to track. And I think people just only have only have so much space, and that's why, as you guys have said, I think finding that one or two big things that people are really going to latch onto is just so important. And I'm talking to a couple of strategists here. You guys know that, obviously, but that's something I'm waiting to see what does resonate, what does grab people. It's a bit early to find out that, but we didn't even track it on the traffic that we get in our stories. Nothing's really popping as far as the stories we've done so far. And there's just been a lot of promises. There's been a lot of announcements. I said the government's doing 5 a day. The NDP's doing 1 a day. We don't cover them all the same because some of them are stuff we've already heard. The NDP's announced a lot of things so far that they've already talked about during the sitting. They've talked about it when Carla Beck became leader. These are all promises. A lot of them are promises they've made before. And the last thing I'll say when we're talking about this is both sides are going to paint the other as unaffordable. Like, their promises are unaffordable. So we've already heard Scott Moe say to Carla Beck's promises she's rolled out, we can't afford this. How's she paying for it? Let's see the math. And that's going to happen once the Sask Party releases its campaign, and then it'll be up to the voter. But I'm really fascinated to see, as Sam has said, how this plays out. Can we get volunteers out? What's the ground game like? Back in the day, the NDP was notorious when there was government for having this like incredible ground game. And especially in the cities, they could get people out, and they had this base of people. They had this base of volunteers, this base of party supporters. That dwindled. You just have to go to like a party office, 10, 15 years ago, and you just noticed that the Sask Party had this huge wave. They had lots of young people, lots of university students on the doorsteps. It was very easy to see their kind of packed offices. And if that's played out where, the Sask Party has seen some of that dwindle in the cities, and people are, I don't trust the polls either. We have it sucks for me as a political reporter, because I'd love to see these polls and go, oh, hey, like that's really good. But we don't have a big enough base of people. There's not enough polling happening in Saskatchewan because of the population, unfortunately. So we're kind of going in blind in a lot of cases, and there could be some surprises. It would be a lot about vote turnout, and who can kind of rally people, and a lot about people staying home. As Sam said, like, people are going to just be deciding, hey, I don't like the way things are going, but I don't want to change my vote. Or I don't like where the things are going, or I'm just not paying attention to this because there's too much other stuff going on. I'm more interested in the mayoral race. I'm really invested in this, in Regina, Saskatoon, let's say, or I pay much more attention to federal politics, and that's distracted me. So there's just so much happening right now. It's tough to track, and I think that's probably the case for a lot of voters.
There's a lot I could respond to there, and I think one thing back to I wanted to some of the campaign messages and what we can expect. I think probably all parties sort of feel like there's fewer volunteers, and I think it's just the nature of how campaigning happens now. And we could spend more time talking about that, but gone are the days where you had volunteers collating and putting things on clipboard and crossing names out on lists. Everything is just invested in a database now, and so thankfully, because I think just volunteerism and commitment to member organizations, and that sort of idea, whether it's churches, political parties, service clubs, it's all kind of a different landscape than it was 20 years ago, perhaps. But so that kind of makes it harder to see, because we don't see the busyness around some of these campaigns like we perhaps used to. Man, what was it? What we were talking about, sort of issues and sort of what's going to resonate through the campaign, I think. If I were the NDP, I think I would be sort of looking to how the Manitoba NDP ran their campaign last fall, and taking some lessons from that. And obviously some different dynamics, both the geography and the politics of Manitoba, as well as sort of who the leaders were. We were talking earlier about kind of firebrand, once in a generation communicators. And I think Wab Kinew is that for sort of the, Western New Democratic movement. I think he sort of resonates in a way and can communicate in a way others cannot. But I think they're going to want to make it all about healthcare. I think that will be the issue you're going to want to dive into. Public polling, as much as we get, says that healthcare and cost of living, like I said, are the number one and number two issues. I think it's hard for an opposition party to, in the current environment and the context of politics today, that the cost of living is the provincial government's fault. I think there's been a lot of effort, and a lot of the paradigm suggests that that's Justin Trudeau's fault. That's the federal government are the ones that are responsible, and what happens in Ottawa. But there is no denying that any challenges you have in healthcare are a provincial issue, and that's up to the provincial government. And there are more things you can point at. There are more stories. There's more evidence that the provincial government is failing at healthcare here in Saskatchewan. And so I think that would be what I would see as far as an issue that is centered around the campaign. I think that's where the NDP would want to go. I think, talking about the economy and cost of living now, I think so much isn't to people generally for generations trust New Democrats or progressive parties on a lot of things, but where they find them least credible sometimes is sort of the management of the economy. And so you kind of have to sort of take your medicine and sort of demonstrate, not that you want it to be the ballot question or the conversation of the campaign that around the economy, but you want to be able to demonstrate that you have some credibility. So not so much to give people a reason to vote for you, but as to why they shouldn't vote against you, if that's clear, right? And so we know the things that the Sask Party and Conservative parties are generally strong at, right? And what they're weak at. We know Conservative parties are going to want to, inoculate themselves against sort of social issues sometimes to show that they're not, I think Sam was talking about sort of some putting some markers out on addictions and some other social service related things, because I think probably the electorate feels like that's a place where the Sask Party has to demonstrate some credibility, and likewise the NDP. But I think they should make, if I was wanting to run a campaign, I want to make it fairly focused on from an issue, healthcare, because I think it's worked. And everybody has an experience in the healthcare system in the last 2 years, and by all accounts, it doesn't look to be getting any better. And I think the other thing is just sort of around trust and sort of comparing the leaders, and if it's time for a change. I think if I was the opposition, that's what I'd be looking at. I think the Sask Party probably has a bit of a challenge in sort of their universe. They probably are pulling the data, and it maybe looks like it's getting a little bit smaller. And so they've got to be, thinking about how they, it can get smaller and they can still win a majority government. But they just need to be mindful of kind of that mushy middle, I think, of voters is where for the NDP, I think the difference between having some good improvements and getting close to, or maybe if all stars align, forming government. That'd be hard to say in Saskatchewan. I've never said that before a few months ago, but it's going to sort of be whether that mushy middle stays home or whether they decide that they're going to switch their vote from the Sask Party, which has sort of dominated the center of Saskatchewan politics, and they're going to vote for the NDP. Because sort of when you do your math, if I can convince somebody not to go vote for the Sask Party, that's worth 1 point. But if I can convince them to actually not vote for the Sask Party and vote for me, that's worth 2 points. And so it's when you start getting those folks who maybe would otherwise stay home now voting for the NDP, for example, that you could actually start seeing picking up some significant seats. If that's 2, 3, 4% would make a difference in a lot of spots.
Playing a game of probabilities. I like it. That's really all campaigning is, right? You can have a plan, but then the world happens and all you can do is either be ready for it or fall apart.
Yeah, if you're trying to win the plurality of seats in a majority, or a plurality of votes in a majority of seats, it just becomes a math game, right? So
I like the reference to the mushy middle. I think that's a great one. So in terms of party strategy a little bit, we've heard a little bit of this in this conversation, but the concern over the urban rural kind of shift that we're seeing here a little bit, and that I'm assuming that the urban will shift and we will see some changes. What do you think that the party should focus on in strategy-wise to either keep pushing that or to kind of keep those seats? What do you think we're going to see in the next little bit, and how will that affect this outcome?
Well, I mean, maybe I'd start just briefly, and then not that I want to also back cleanup, but I'd introduce a couple pieces. And I think it's not just, I think, provincial politics. I think I see sort of there's more of a general line being drawn in Saskatchewan, perhaps other places, of this what perceived a real urban rural divide. I'm experience, I work in the labor movement, and that there those conversations you hear more than you used to, as well as I involved in the cooperative movement here in Saskatchewan, and that seems to be a conversation that dominates. So and politics as well. The reality for the NDP is that in Saskatchewan, you have to win. I think if I did the math, you got to win all of Regina, Saskatoon, Prince Albert, the 2 northern seats, and both of Moose Jaw. And I think that squeaks it out a majority. And for the Sask Party, likewise, they concede to all of their urban seats and still hold on to government. And so I think that's probably some of the, if I was on the government side, I'd be sort of doing the math to figure out, like, if you feel like you're going to want to maintain government, but you want, you're going to have a smaller government, you're going to probably be thinking along some sort of urban rural split of some kind.
Anyone else on the urban rural debate here?
Yeah, I think what I'll be watching for is where the two campaigns spend their time. I think that'll tell us a lot about where they think, where their polls are telling them they're in trouble or they're doing well if they don't show up in a certain area, or they're just do a quick hour stop by. They may think that that's some place where they're either not going to win or they're going to do really well. I'm pretty interested as someone who is in Regina, watching those sort of urban suburban seats in Saskatoon and Regina, because the Sask Party does have a lot of support in those areas. And is the NDP going to gain enough ground in those, sort of suburban seats in those new areas I'm thinking of in and around Saskatoon and Regina to really win those seats? I think there's a lot of talk, the NDP is going to just do really well in the cities. They may just get a lot of votes where they're already popular. They may get a lot of votes where they've won in the past. Like, if they pick up Riversdale and Saskatoon, that will not surprise anyone. That's been a traditional NDP stronghold, and everyone was shocked when they lost that one, I think, in the last election. Can they win Regina Northeast where they've won before? Will they hold on to Regina Welsh Acres? Like, these are the places where they're very strong. Does that translate into winning a Regina Rochdale or Saskatoon Chief Mistilwasis? Like, can they pick up those seats? And how can they make a dent in, the Martinsville, Blairmore, Warman, those areas, if at all? Because I would consider those urban seats as well, in a sense. Regina, a White City, Coupel is another one where there's kind of a mix of, rural and urban. If there's a true kind of shift to the NDP into winning some of these urban places, and where they're going to be serious and as Nathaniel says, like, form government at some point, they have to win those seats. They can't just be competitive. And in the last couple of elections, in those suburban seats, they haven't been competitive. And so that's just a huge shift for that mushy middle, if we're going to call it that. That's a huge shift for people that are apathetic or not voting, or people who live in a neighborhood where they have a comfortable life. They have a nice house. They have their kids go to a brand new school, let's say, that was built under the Sask Party. That's why the Sask Party showing up at all these schools in these areas, is they put schools there. They built a new neighborhood. A new neighborhood was built in those cities. A school went there, and they can say, hey, you may have 27 kids in this class, but there is a brand new school. And that's sort of the argument between these two sides. So, and if the NDP spends a ton of time in PA and Moose Jaw, where there's maybe some vulnerability for the Sask Party, that'll be interesting too. But yeah, that's what we'll be watching for. As far as very quickly on the rural thing, I have no idea how the Saskatchewan United Party, the Buffalo Party, how they affect voting, how they affect turnout, how they affect campaigning. Whether we talked about earlier, your candidate not making mistakes, your candidate being kept under wraps, or maybe keeping to this party message. Is that something you want to do in some of these rural areas where there's going to be a lot of campaigning by these so-called third parties? I don't know. I'm not the campaign person like my two fellow guests here. I'd love to hear their thoughts on what the party strategy is to try and, stem off this challenge from the right. Because Scott Moe said last week in a news conference, he was asked about Dennis Allchurch and Greg Burkett running for the Sask United Party. He kind of sloughed it off and said, well, there's only two parties that can form government, and any other vote is a throwaway. And you're splitting the vote, and he used the Alberta example from a few elections ago where the progressive conservatives and the Wild Rose, split the right vote, and the NDP came up the middle. And he said, they got 40% of the vote, they formed government. And the last election, they had 44% and didn't form government because the right was united. That's been his message. And I think that'll be the message from those candidates out there, whether that plays out. And obviously that helps the NDP, but it may not really affect the NDP if it's in areas where the NDP is not competitive. So the government, the Sask Party is kind of fighting. They have two fights in this election, and I'd love to hear Sam and Nathaniel's thoughts on that. Where you send your strategy, what you do about that.
Well, you set it up perfectly for me, because the two things that I was going to talk about was, I hadn't heard the Premier actually sort of be dismissive of the SUP, but like 2 months ago, I signed up for their emails, the Sask United Party, when John Romick became the leader. And I started they started announcing tours, right? We're going to be in this town and this town and this town. And so then I got curious because I knew that the Premier was out as well. And while they weren't going to the exact same places, there was very much a correlation with where they were going versus the Sask United Party. And for the Premier to be stopping in a place like Rosetown, which Jim Ryder has had on lockdown forever, is very interesting. So definitely publicly, they're not a problem, but privately, 110,000%, it's an issue. It's the same old issue with the Reform Party and the Canadian Alliance, and brought those back together, and thank God we made it there. Not that I'm conservative, but it's a very similar issue. And they're really, to be frank, I think it's something that they've done to themselves, that we have the Sask United Party. Whether you think Nadine Wilson is a credible candidate or not is another story, but there's enough disgruntled, unhappy people from that tent, our tent, I'll call it, the Sask Party tent, that they're out there and they're gaining some traction, whether they form a government or get a candidate elected. We don't need to debate that today, but it's there and it's a problem. And so I don't know how seriously the party is taking it, but when I look at the candidate recruitment process for the Sask Party versus the NDP, it speaks to the same issue. Somebody on Twitter posted a 9-square photo of Sask Party candidates, and they were all bald white men.
Like that Brady Bunch.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's concerning. 15 women nominated with the Sask Party. I think over half the NDP's current caucus is female, and I haven't actually looked to see how many you guys have nominated on the NDP, but I'm guessing there's a much closer parity or equitable spread of male to female, and also different cultural backgrounds too. So there's a lot of things that I think are being ignored or not done as well as they could or should be, and the fact that this party, the Sask Party, is having such a hard time, no offense to the current slate of candidates, but attracting younger, female, and culturally diverse people should be concerning. The other piece that has been fascinating, I went to almost every Sask Party nomination that I could drive to that wasn't going to take me about 4 hours. And for the majority of those, I didn't know a person in the room. It was people from the Sikh community, from the Pakistani community, a very heavy ethnic influence of newcomers, or sort of newcomers, or people who've been here for a long time. But it's a very different province, and I don't think that, again, the Sask Party is maybe fully caught up to that fact and really embraced it. And so that's going to be another factor at play, whether you like to admit it or not. There's a number of candidates in both Saskatoon and Regina who are from a number of those communities, and I'm not sure that they're going to have the same response from the voting public as, the square of the 9 Brady Bunch white guys are. And I think that's just the reality of society, even though we wish it weren't. So, a lot of different things at play right now.
Sam, as a bald-ish white man, I don't take any offense to that. There's
Hey, I
a
mean,
lot.
some of you
No,
are
I'm
really
kidding.
great to look at, but I
Oh, yeah.
mean, is that you're not all that's there in this world, are you?
No, I think the demographic thing is really fascinating, and I've noticed this in the last couple of elections, even in the by-election, when you get out to events and you see such a wide range of people from different cultural ethnic backgrounds, and there is, I think, sort of jockeying um, for those votes. And even in Regina, Coronation Park, I think Nathaniel can help me on this, but there was in the last by-election, Noor Burki and Riz Ahmed went to the same faith. They're in the same faith community, and they were living in the same neighborhood, fighting over the same votes with their friends and family members. And they're like, "Hey, we were friends. Like I helped him in his last campaign." So that how that plays out, I think, is going to be really interesting. And there's been a lot of made of that kind of attracting the same candidate. What we haven't touched on yet is how the SAS party and voters look at all these new faces, because there's 7, I think, cabinet ministers who aren't running again. There are double digits retiring members, and that's something we haven't experienced before. And how that plays out, you were used to your Don Morgan going to your doorstep for years and years and years, or you're used to Don McMorris. You're getting to know a brand new candidate, and is it about the candidate? Is it about the party? And how that plays out when you have someone who's a new candidate or a newcomer in some of these cities. There's going to be a lot of, I think, afterwards analysis to see how that all went down. And I think both parties would say they're trying, and I've asked them about this, they're trying to appeal to more people. They're trying to be more diverse. They're trying to recruit candidates from different backgrounds, find more Indigenous candidates, find more women. And it's noticeable when you look at those pages. How that translates, I'll be fascinated to see.
Well, and just to cap it off, there's a massive lesson to be learned from these diverse communities, because they are engaged and they show up and they are excited. And most of the rest of us, as Caucasian individuals in this province, can't say the same. We can't deny our low voter turnout. We can't deny what a lot of the candidates look like. And nobody can be upset about it, because we all have the same opportunities to participate and be engaged, and to the spoils to the victor, really. So
Yeah. And I'm not sure, Margot, if we moved on to, I know in your notes you had said that we were going to talk about the third or smaller parties. I don't know if you want to keep digging in there, or where we should go, but I had to respond.
If you have some comments, I'd love to hear them. That was one of my next questions, so you guys got ahead of me. I like it.
Yeah, well, I think it'll be interesting. I think we've kind of surveyed the rise of the Sask United Party and sort of other alternative right of center parties that have emerged in the last little while. So I think, was it Sam, you just sort of used the term "when the dust settles." I've got lots of things I'd be interested in when the dust settles, because I would think a year ago, as we sort of not to get into the horrific details, but how some might say that the SAS party took some pretty drastic steps and called an emergency session. Some might say the motive was to kind of stamp out this growing other right-wing parties, and have this debate to sort of, bring them back into the tent. I think if they knew what they knew a year ago, they maybe wouldn't have wasted their time as a government doing that, because it hasn't really. Maybe the Sask United Party would be more of a viable threat now, but they certainly are still there, and they're certainly, I think, creating havoc. And I'm sure that for a governing party for 17 years that didn't really have to think about a war on two fronts, it's probably taking up a bit of time and space and resources thinking about it. I wouldn't be surprised if in some of these rural constituencies, not to say that maybe the Sask United Party would play spoiler in some suburban seats if they, I guess, ran a candidate and, got 5, 6, 10% of the vote. which may tip it to the NDP coming up the middle. But like, who's to say in Estevan or Saskatchewan Rivers where, you know, maybe the Sask party wins with less than 40% of the vote, or, you know, or close races with some of these third parties in some corners of the province. And that's the sort of one thing that the polling is really, any polling I've seen where it's hard to really poll third parties, especially new ones like the Sask United Party, when you don't even really know if they're going to run a full slate of candidates. So, you know, if I was living to go to Sam again to Rosetown, you know, and I got a call about polling and I said, yeah, I'm going to vote Sask United. And then you know, not all voters have the same amount of electoral and political information I have. And you might walk into the voting booth and realize, oh, that isn't an option on my ballot. And so how some of that polling is going to shake out is going to be hard to determine, especially in those conversations and some of those, maybe what the NDP would like to be battleground seats, sort of those smaller cities and suburban Regina and Saskatoon. You know, the polling may be hard. It may be hard to read the tea leaves on whether, you know, there's an opportunity they could win simply because of that third party on the ballot. But it will be interesting to see. And it's interesting to see that I can't help but make comment that a former third party candidate, the progressive conservative leader, Ken Gray, who once said that Salisbury is plagued by scandal, deficits, and debt, is now running for them. And so it will be interesting, I guess, to see, because I think we talked earlier about sort of the mudslinging. I think there will be more of that this campaign than perhaps last time. I think the Sask parties cruised to victory and knew that they were cruising to victory. And so, you know, maybe you didn't need to keep the powder dry on some things, where I think it'll get a little uglier this time. I'm sure we're going to see Carla's head sinking into whatever the same graphic use every time, the however many big billion-dollar hole, and her head sinking into it they've used the last 4 elections. And they'll talk about, you know, they're going to want to talk about the carbon tax and who said what about the carbon tax. But I don't think that's working anymore. I think anybody that needed to hear it and wants to hear it has heard it. And so I think that universe is kind of drying up. And I think the NDP probably has some opportunities to kind of cast doubt on, you know, some of the candidates the Sask party is running this time, as much as the Sask party. So it'll kind of, and as we get more into the internet age where everybody's got a record of saying something on the internet, how that continues to morph and play out in sort of the ugly side of election campaigns.
Well,
Yeah,
sorry, go ahead, Adam.
I was just going to quickly say, I do think the carbon tax is going to be something that's talked about, and I think that if I don't see an ad of Jagmeet Singh, Justin Trudeau, and Carla Beck together, I'll buy you all a drink. That's probably the easiest bet in Saskatchewan politics, regardless of what the NDP says and what they're saying against the carbon tax now. It's what happened in Alberta. It's what happened in Manitoba. It's going to happen in New Brunswick, these other places. There's a reason why they do it. Jagmeet Singh and Justin Trudeau do not poll well in Saskatchewan. Shocking, I know. That will be something that will be happening in this campaign.
So we only have a couple minutes left, but I wanted to touch on 2 other quick points here. And Adam just mentioned, I want to know what you guys think about the federal-provincial relationship and how that might play into this campaign, and if the parties are going to use this relationship as a bit of a lever in their strategy. And is this something that the voters care about? Is this, it's not shocking that we have a contentious relationship. Is that something that our voters care about? And will we see a change there? Will it be something that is of interest to the candidates?
What I've actually thought a lot about is, what does the Sask party do when Trudeau's not in power? You know, if the Conservatives get elected and the number one villain, because every story needs a villain, and that has been the Sask party's villain for years. I am curious to know what the world looks like. You know, in some version of it, I think it's a very shiny, happy Technicolor future, because all of a sudden we've finally got some like-minded people in government and maybe we're getting our way. But maybe we don't get our way. Maybe Pierre is fully like, no way, we're not going to bring up anything that we've already cut even before Trudeau was in government. And, we get into even heavier austerity land or something.
Yeah.
That's, to me, is very interesting. And I don't think during this election in particular, that's a reliable foil either. And so in the absence of a villain and in the absence of a vision on both sides, again, I don't really know where you go with that other than maybe to actually bring out some damn right ideas.
Yeah. I guess I would respond quickly. I think it's going to be that's kind of I think that Sask Party, frankly, it's their only trick. And so at this point, in a lot of ways, so of course it's going to be where they're going to want the frame of the election to go. I think the NDP, if I was making suggestions, has not done a good enough job at distancing themselves from the federal NDP. I think there were strategic opportunities in which they could have sort of made a big pivot, and they haven't. And that's, I think, a political misstep. But if I was the Sask Party, I would be blowing all of my federal ammo now, because Justin Trudeau's not going to be around and Jagmeet Singh's not going to be around next time. So if you want to pick the federal fight, this is your last chance to do it. And you're going to have a conservative government. And I mean, yeah, if I'm looking to 4 years from now, I mean, I don't even think Scott Moe's in the picture in 4 years, but I think this is your last shot. And so if I was them, I would do it that way. And I would, if I was the NDP, I would try to pivot from that and focus on what matters to people around their kitchen tables, and in a way to try to appeal to people with some common sense and the fact that maybe they're ready for something different.
Okay, well, I think I'm respectful of your guys' time here, so maybe we'll just do a quick round. If there's any other things you'd like to add, anything, any predictions, anything interesting you think might be coming down the pipes, or just any final comments.
I'll just say I'm really interested to see where these parties decide to start the campaign, where they spend their time. I'm going to have a little map on my desk where I am putting a pin every time they're in a certain constituency. So I think they know better than we do where they're vulnerable. And if it'll be the first time in a while, if the Sask Party is vulnerable, if some of these polls are trusted, that we'll see a more competitive campaign, a more competitive election. And just finally, the last election campaign was so strange because it was in a pandemic. We didn't have big events. We didn't have big rallies. We didn't have that kind of groundswell of things happening. There wasn't as much, I don't think, pressure just from covering the candidates on different events, because they were they were virtual everywhere. They weren't having to walk up to a voter and say, "Oh, hey, you could stop somewhere and chat in front of cameras," which happens during the campaign. So I think how that plays out and how Scott Moe handles that, how Carla Beck handles that, I'll be watching for that. And like I said, I'll be watching for where they're spending their time, because that'll give us a better sense, I think, of what the final count could be.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think our constituencies are so small, it's hard to track by riding, because you don't necessarily go and stop in Saskatoon Willow Grove to appeal to them as much as you might just be in Saskatoon talking about Saskatoon issues. But I would imagine that both parties will be focused on probably between 6 and 12 seats are going to be the six or 12 seats. I think probably the NDP sees that they have a floor that is much higher and an expectation that's much higher than the last few elections. And so they're going to, once they have those locked down, they're going to be trying to win as many more as they can, because I think that, without winning, 6, 8, 10 more seats is going to be a disappointment in any respect. And I think in the last few days, you'll really get a sense to see if they're really going for gold, or if they're, looking to have an election night where they are a government, a serious government in waiting on November 1st.
For me, final thoughts, things that I'll be looking for. Saskatoon's got a big ticket project that we're sort of competing with PA for in terms of the deed and event centers. So if I were a betting person, I would be watching to see money announced in Prince Albert first. And that's a way to shore up what I would say is probably two not so strong candidates in, seats that turn over quite a bit. I'm also going to be watching Yorkton, which is weird, but there's some issues with the Sask Party candidate out there. The NDP has apparently been doing very well. They've got a great campaign office. And people who might have volunteered for the Sask Party in the past are helping the NDP candidate, because at the end of the day, politics can still be very local. And just because you don't have a political card doesn't mean that you can't change your colors, and vice versa. Even if you do, things can change. Yeah. And so that is not me announcing anything that I will be doing differently, but it's an interesting time, right? We just got through COVID finally. All those challenges with our healthcare system, our education system, all those things that have been brought to light. And so is this an opportunity for a reset and some actual policy to help move us up and above and away from COVID? Or are we just kind of going to get lost and sort of stuck in the middle again? I'm not sure.
Yeah, Yorkton's always been that seat that's voted with government all but once in Saskatchewan history. They've had a government member. So,
well, and we talked about what life would look like under a conservative government with a Sask Party majority. What does it look like with an NDP tiny majority, maybe, but a conservative government?
Next time.
Well, thank you guys so much. I want to say also, on behalf of our Saskatoon Chamber members, we of course will be watching very closely, particularly on what relates to our local businesses and our small businesses. We know that they have felt the pinch over the last number of years, and it continues to be the case. So we are very, very much invested in this election process. So thank you guys so much for participating today and for sharing your insights. So on behalf of the Saskatoon Chamber and PAC, we really appreciate that. Little bit of a plug here for an upcoming event that PAC is hosting on September 26th. It will be with the Saskatchewan Lobbyist Registrar on some of the rules of upcoming elections and what that might look like. So I think that's an important one to stay tuned for everyone that will be watching this later. So thanks everyone for tuning in, and we look forward to continuing these important conversations.